Hey guys, and welcome back to the shop. As you can see, I've got the Chevelle up on the lift and we're going to be working under it today. So let's check it out after the intro. Welcome to the Kiefer's Hot Rod Shop YouTube channel. I'm Nick Kiefer. All right, awesome. So now that the Chevelle is up on the lift, it's time to go ahead and start working on the floor structure of the car. And as you may be able to tell, this already has the 2A inner frame rails installed. The owner of the car did that before I ever saw the car. So that's awesome. These are DOM steel, MIG welded in place. For a 25.5, that is okay, as long as these are at least 1.5 inch, 0.109 wall, any kind of mild steel. If they're chromoly, they have to be 1.5 inch, 0.65 or larger. The first thing we're going to check out is I'm going to be adding tubes between the boxing plates that are already in the frame, which is another nice thing. That's something you have to do on a channel frame style car, is you have to box it wherever you're attaching tubes for the roll cage structure. I'll just be running tubes between that and these 2A, and that's going to be the 6A and 6B front crossmember bars. And also we'll be taking a look at adding a number 9 seat crossmember reinforcement bar in the driver's side under seat area as well. So let's check it out. All right, so I'm going to take you in for a little bit closer look at the kind of the situation here. I've taken this brake line out of the way, and you can see this is actually the A-pillar bar, and I've been working on welding a bunch of bars in the car, kind of off camera, just kind of getting everything all stitched together and ready to move on to these next steps. But I'm going to be adding a 6A 1 5/8 083 chromoly bar between this boxing plate and this 2A inner frame rail. This happens to be 1 5/8. It can be 1.5 optionally, but 1 5/8 is nice because this bar is going to be 1 5/8, so it'll tie in nicely. And I want to keep this thing in line with this bar as much as I can, just for strength. And the rules kind of want everything to be about in the same place. So on a perimeter frame car, as long as this frame rail is below and outside of the driver's legs, it counts as the rocker bar. So that's really convenient in the case of Chevelles and other A bodies and Impalas and Galaxies and stuff like that. I'll also be adding one over here on this side, just the same. And then there's a little bit smaller 1.25 inch seat bar that needs to go in this area between the main frame rail or rocker bar and this 2A once again. So what I'm going to go ahead and do to run this 6A front lower crossmember bar is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grind the finish off of the boxing plate and the 2A inner frame rail, for that's going to sit on both sides. And I'll probably go ahead and do that where this seat crossmember is going to go as well. And then I'll cut a couple pieces of tube, notch one side, bring them over here, and just kind of fine tune that to fit. So let's check out cleaning this up first, and then we'll head to my shop and cut some tubes. right, cool. So I'll just kind of show you the spots that I polished up. You can see right under the A-pillar tube there, and then across from it on the 2A, and the same thing on the passenger side. And also clean that spot up under the driver's side seat area. And I'm going to run that kind of as close as I can to where that seat mounts at the back, just so that it can help to reinforce that down the road, but also just want to maintain clearance to everything and be able to weld it. So that'll be going in right after I put these in. And first to put these in, I'm gonna have to go ahead and make them. So we'll go over to my shop and check that out next. All right, cool. So as you can see, back over at my shop, and just about to cut a couple pieces of 1 5/8 083 to make the 6A and 6B front cross members there. And then I'll notch one side and clean up the other side. I was kind of measuring the angle off camera of the actual boxing plates that are on those original frame rails, and they do tilt in at about 1 degree. So I'm not going to worry about setting the saw to 1 degree, but I'm just going to kind of measure them out and polish them up to that angle, since it's so slight and straight. And also that surface isn't exactly flat because it is a boxing plate on original frame. So I'll just, once again, like I said earlier, clean it up to fit that properly. A little bit over here and a little bit on the car. And then, like I said, notch the other side, clean it all up. We'll check it out over there. But I'll put you on the time lapse to make those 2 tubes, and then we'll head over next door. Cool. All right, so now I want to put a little bit of angle on the ends of the cross member tubes I just made, and I calculated it out. This table's 7 inches kind of wide, or deep I guess you'd say in this case, and it's 7 inches, 1 degree, rises about 1/8 inch for that 7-inch run. That's loose and approximate, but it's pretty close. And so I've actually got a piece of 1/8 filler rod here, and I'm just going to secure it with a piece of tape. I'm going to try to use it to grind a 1 degree angle into those pieces. I don't really want to angle the table just for a slight angle like that, and I have this set up at 90 degrees and I like to keep it there. For angle stuff I'll use the disc sander built in too, but let's try this out. I also went ahead and I just kind of marked the side that I'm going to be shortening, just for identification later. All right, cool. So these have just a little bit of an angle now. Really hard to tell visually, but let's take them over there and see how they fit in the car. All right, so I've been working with this tube or on the passenger side here, and I've had to grind the bottom away just to tilt it into place. It's never going to get there like this, and then this boxing plate actually tapers towards this 2A inner frame rail as it goes forward, so from above all the way at the back is the closest I'm getting, or furthest I'm getting apart. But the best I can do with where it's ground, let's see, get it all nice and parallel, is right where I had it at the start of the video. It's like right there, and it won't slide forward. So I'm going to go ahead and going to work on shortening this up a little bit over on the belt sander at that same kind of angle as before, and I'll get it to slide into place, and we'll check it out after that. All right, well, I went next door and I ground the shins off of this thing and got it to fit pretty much exactly right. I'm going to measure off of this and probably a few other things, and also make sure it's right in line with my A-pillar bar up there, but that's looking really sweet. Slides right in there and it's pretty tight. I ended up kind of angling the angle that I was grinding it at, because if you can see, this 2A angles up, and typically I'd get really scientific and mathematic about all this, but the installation of the tube dictates just as much as the fitment in this case, so just kind of playing it by ear, or by feel more so. But this thing's in there. Now what I can do is fine tune it, and I'll also make sure all of the coating is cleaned off around where it lands, and I'll probably go ahead and put some marks on here and just establish a place where I'm going to drill my gas expansion hole. So that's looking really awesome. Again, I'll measure this and make sure everything's nice and parallel. I'm going to go ahead and do this one over here, and we will check that out once I get it fitting in. Alright, so I grounded a little bit on the end, and even kind of touched it up a little bit with the roll-lock grinder on that end, and it's dropping down almost in place, but just need to touch it up a little more, and I think I'll be able to get it close. So we'll check that out next. Alright, cool. So I've been working on kind of final fit up on the passenger side here, really both sides, but you can see how this is fitting. And I've added a piece of tape which lines up with the front of the A-pillar bar in the cowl area there where it joins the main frame rail, and then I added a piece over here as well, measuring from this existing brace, just to kind of get all that parallel, and that's looking pretty good. It's got a little bit of wiggle in it, but again, it just has to have a little funkiness just to get it into place. So I think what I want to do with that is just go ahead and clean it up, inside and out, polish it, drill my gas expansion hole on the boxing plate of the main frame rail there, and get that ready to weld in. But on the other side, you can see I've also basically done the same thing. However, this hole into the tube, well, I mean it's just the tube, but Looking at it on this end, you can see it's almost a 1/16 of an inch short. At the top it's a little tighter, but you can see I've got that screwdriver jammed in there to hold it in place. So I think it can be a little longer as far as installing it. So unfortunately I think I'm just going to have to go ahead and remake that. But I don't want to have to weld up that big gap over there. That might be a little problematic, and just not as strong as if the inside of that tube went all the way over. So I'm going to work on that next. The good thing is I've got all the dimensions, and then it'll be time to move on to the back. Consequently, I went ahead and I measured the angle of this tube. It's not level like the front stuff is. It's at an angle because this bar drops down across the middle of the car, and you can see it kind of is higher where it joins with that and how close that is to the bottom of the frame rail. And I think I'm just going to angle this to match that, and that's going to require a 5-degree miter on this side. And so we'll check that out later too. Alright, so went ahead and remade this cross member here. Got it to fit nice and tight around the top, but the bottom just has to have a little bit of a gap to be able to slide into place. Not too bad, nothing I can't manage with some filler rod. So that's looking good. His notch is looking good. Now it's just time for me to make the driver's seat support bar. It goes across here. So we'll go next door to my shop and check that out next. All right, cool. Back over here at my shop, I'm gonna cut a little bit of 1.25" 058 chromoly off the stick, then make it into that driver's seat support bar. See if this thing fits. Check that out. It's looking really good. Lines up nicely with everything. It's level with that rear bar that was already part of the car. Notch looks good. Miter looks good. I'm liking it. Now that I've got all three of these bars in place, I'm just going to go ahead and work on cleaning everything up. Got to polish these inside and out. Make sure where they land is all polished up as well. And I want to go ahead and drill gas expansion holes into the boxing plates of the frame for those tubes. I'm going to leave this one alone for right now. I'm still working on positioning it exactly where I want it. So I won't be polishing that or drilling the hole quite yet. We'll check that out later. But for these front two, I'm going to get them in place, tack them in, and start welding on them. So we'll check all that out next. Alright, so before I pull this tube out to clean it, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of make a mark around where it sits, just so I know where to drill the gas expansion hole, and also so that I can make sure it's clean under where it sits. And I can also do the same over here, just so I can take a look at that as well. I already have the tape in place, so I know kind of the front boundaries and all that, but this just lets me know the center center line of that tube. And I'll go ahead and pull it out, fish this thing out of there, and get it cleaned up. All right, cool. So got everything all polished up, cleaned up, and mocked up, or actually set up. And now it's time to go ahead and tack these in. Got everything parallel as far as these kind of reinforcements in those bars and on both sides. Got the tape all lined up and everything, so now I just need to go ahead and weld them in. I'm gonna start with a couple tacks, just like a tack on either side probably, and then I'll weld as much as I can, and later when I pick the body up I'll be able to weld around the top better if I can't get to some of this, so check that out next. Alright, that's about all I can reach at this point. In there I'm going to touch those up just to even them out. I had to add a lot of filler, so just to smooth that out. But I'm going to let it cool first, work on tacking the other side up. Alright, so I switched to my more compact back cap, shorter than the other one, and I was able to get in there a little bit tighter, and got these things welded most of the way around now. Smooth some of the welds out, but for the most part looking good. So hopefully I'll be able to get to the tops pretty easily when I pick the body up, but things are really starting to be one with the car. So that's looking good. All right, well, since the last scene, putting those front crossmember bars in, a little bit of time has passed, but I've managed to mock up a an engine block. It's like a 5348 block, and an old Power Glide. And as you can see, I've been working on, I've got a string stretched between the pinion at full droop and the output shaft of the Power Glide here, and I'm working on measuring for a rear cross member. So talking to the owner of the car, we've gone ahead and agreed that want to run one down here under the floor. He wanted some kind of cross member connecting these two A bars anyway, and I just figured it'd be best to go ahead and do the #1 rear cross member all the way across, going through these and connecting to the factory frame rail on either side. He's planning to run a 3 3/4 inch drive shaft. So I've been working on using a straight edge and a measuring tape to measure just how much clearance I need, or how much droop I need for proper clearance. That's the main hoop there, so you can see that on either side. So what I want to do is I want to line this #1 bar up with that, or at least get it real close, tied into the factory frame really nicely. And what I'm gonna actually have to do next is make some room for it. So as you can see, I've kind of marked the spot where I want to put that bar, and I'm going to use a hole saw to notch these out to 1 5/8 for that new #1 bar. So another thing I need to do and be ready for is actually the number 18 bars that go between the #1 rear cross member and that number 15 bar that goes across the main hoop inside the car. And I've got to cut holes in the floor for those to come down to meet these bars anyway. So I'm going to work on doing that next. I'm going to cut some holes in the floor for those, and that's also going to give me access to the top of this weld joint on either side, so that I can cut this bar out of the way and polish that all up, and again work on making space for that new #1 rear cross member. So we'll check that out next. All right, so we're over here in the passenger side floor area, down behind where the front seat goes, and this is actually the factory drain plug location where this goes. I popped this off using a gasket scraper, and these later A bodies are just held down by seam sealer, no screw or anything like that. But I'm going to have to open the floor up right here to get to where the current bars intersect, and also where the new bar is going to go, and where this number 18 bar coming from the number 15 main hoop crossbar is going to drop down. So I kind of tried to incorporate this opening into where the floor plug sits, and so hopefully that can kind of be used if the owner wants, when kind of sealing the floor back up. But otherwise, pretty decently flat area to cut out. So go ahead and cut this out, and then we'll move on from there. Alright, well, as you can see, gone ahead, opened the floor up, and now I can get to this to cut that off, polish that up nicely. I'll also be able to weld the new tube in through this hole. Let's check out removing this bar next, and then we'll go under the car and kind of look at it from under there, and then need to do the driver's side as well. So we'll check that out next. Alright, got the Sawzall here, and I'm just going to try to cut this tube at the best angle I can to get as much of the top of this tube out of the way as possible so that I won't have to grind a lot off other than just a little bit of tube in the weld. And I'll cut the bottom kind of at the opposite angle, just a little piece that'll be left. Nothing to it but to do it. Let's check it out. Alright, so didn't get as much off as I wanted, but it is cut now. You go ahead and put the car up and cut the other end of it. Let's check that out. Alright, it's out. Alright, well, here's a little view where the tube used to be. Going to work on kind of cutting this little piece off and grinding this all down down to the base metal there. But we'll check it out once that's all cleaned up, and then it'll be time to move on to the other side. We'll check that out next. Alright, so I've been working on cleaning up where that bar used to be on the passenger side, and now I'm moving over to the driver's side. I've got the seat out, it's sitting over there actually, and I'm gonna go ahead and cut a matching hole in the floor on this side. Kind of use the piece from the other side to help mark the spot I'm going to cut, and just gonna open it up just like the other side. Alright, so went ahead and I cut that opening in the floor and got the Sawzall, and now I'm going to go ahead and make that cut on this bar just like I did on the other side. Hopefully I can get it a little tighter on this side. It's a little tricky. I don't want to cut into this one, so just kind of being careful with it, but go ahead and cut that and we'll move on from there. Alright, got it cut. Now let's put the car up and move to the bottom. Alright, so finally got the tube out. I was using the Sawzall obviously and started going through the weld, so Sawzalls don't like that, but got this thing cut off and now I'm just going to clean that up. Alright, so I've been working on cleaning up where the tube used to be welded to the boxing plate and the inner frame rail of the car. And I've got that mostly smoothed out, but what I need to do next is I want to establish a place for the new #1 crossmember to land. And what I want to do is I want to actually put that a little behind where the old tubes were. I want to kind of align those, or align that with the main hoop. I just want to keep that aligned for strength, and it's really the right way to assemble a chassis like this. And so if you look at that, that's going to land kind of in this area, which is behind the boxing plate. the surface, I don't know if you can see this on camera, the surface in this area is kind of curved and at kind of a weird angle. It's also kind of thin. So if you look in this hole here, it's a lot less than like an 1/8 inch. Regardless, it's a little thin, so what I want to do is I've bent a couple pieces of 1/8 inch steel, and I want to cut out this spot and weld these in kind of like this, but inset in so that the surface is nice and flat and runs front to rear in the car, so that I can just land the #1 cross member on these nice and simple on a flat surface. So next what I need to do is go ahead, and I've kind of marked with this gold marker here where I need to cut. So I'm going to go ahead, cut that out, get these fitted up, and then I'll put them in place and kind of mark the profile of that surface there on these, and then I'll cut them out to fit. It'll be time to weld them in, and we'll check that out at that point. All right, so I've been working on the piece and the hole that it fits in, so let's check that opening out first. I cut this out and I've been squaring it off using the roll-lock die grinder, and been working on this piece, kind of trimming it to size, and I've got it fitting in there nicely. The height matches pretty well, bottom to top up there. Looks like I can get a pretty good weld on it. So the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and mark that profile, and I'll work on cutting this plate out to match that, and I'll be ready for everything to be cleaned up and welded in. Another thing is this piece kind of continued into the original channel, so you can see how this continues in and attaches to the frame. So what I want to do is, before I put this piece in, I want to go ahead and run a bead down here and fasten that piece to this boxing plate, since that's a really nice thing to have going across inside of the boxed frame there. There's a lot of strength, you know, in that plate that travels from inside to outside going forward. And then when I weld this in place, I'll be welding the front seam to that same seam there, and everything will be nicely tied together. So I want to do that. I'm going to work on marking this profile like I mentioned a second ago first, and then move forward with getting ready to clean it up and weld it together. All right, cool. So as you can see here, I've gone ahead and traced that profile onto the plate, and here's how it fits in there. So you can see I was able just to trace that and get a nice line. And also I think I want to shorten this a little bit towards this side, because as I pull it back you can kind of see how that top piece is tapered there. But I'm going to go ahead, trim this, and then just kind of start grinding it down to fit just right. All right, cool. So we've got the piece nicely fitted in here. You can see I've shaped it to the profile of the frame, kind of in the rear area there. I did go ahead and shorten this down a little bit just to line up with all that better, and it's fitting in there pretty nicely. So what I want to go ahead and do next is clean up all around where that welds in, get all this coating off, and we'll check it out when it's time to weld it up. All right, so I've been working on cleaning all this stuff up, grinding the coating off, and now I want to go ahead and weld this seam, tie those parts together, and then I'll move on to, I'm going to put the car down on the lift, get inside and try to clean the top up as best I can, and get that piece fitted back in after it's all clean. All right, I'm going to go ahead and work on welding those pieces together. right, I'll let that cool for a bit. Come back and weld it the rest of the way. Alright, so I've got the Chevelle down on the lift and been working on cleaning all this up. It's got a lot of original welds and a lot of crazy surfaces, but between using the roll lock grinder and a wire wheel and kind of the edge of the file to scrape some of this stuff out, I've gotten it pretty clean. And so now I'm going to put the car back up, and I think I'll start tacking this plate in once I get everything all wiped down and cleaned out. So we'll check that out next. Alright, so got everything cleaned up, got this thing taped up in place, and it's time to go ahead and weld it. You might be able to tell I went ahead and I chamfered the outside of this just for weld penetration. You can see it kind of makes a little groove on the bottom. You can see a little bit on this side too. That's just to help tie it in nice and strong. I think what I want to try to do is weld kind of like down and up, forward, back, make it where it's kind of where I'm not pulling the welds in the same way so I don't bend the frame if I can avoid it. So we'll check that out next. Just got to go ahead and tack it up, and I'll pull the tape off and then I'll start running beads. Alright, gonna let it cool. Weld a little more after that. Right, now let's weld the bottom end. Alrighty. Go, let that cool. Alright, now we're inside the car. I have you looking down. This is the main hoop, and this is the top of that plate. I'm just going to work on welding that in, and then this thing will be fully attached to the car. You can move on to the driver's side. Alrighty, got it welded up. Beginning of the weld was a little dirty, so I had to kind of go over it, try to clean it up with some filler. But through here went pretty well, so it's all welded in. I'll just let it cool. Be time to move over to the other side. Awesome. Alright, so Now that I've got the passenger side welded in, I've been working on cutting out the driver's side, and it's pretty much there. Just need to clean up around it, and also, just like the other side, I'm gonna weld this up. It's gonna be a little tricky. It's got a gap on this side, but I'll try to tie that in nicely. And I've also started to fit the plate, and so that just needs to be trimmed. It'll be looking great. All right, so got stuff cleaned up. I'm gonna go ahead and weld this seam here where that piece that goes diagonally inside the frame rail meets this boxing plate. All right, welded half of it up. I'll let it cool, get the other half. I'm also getting to where the gap's a lot bigger, so I might even try to find a little bit bigger piece of filler metal. But I'll let that cool, check it out in a sec. All right, cool, so let this cool down, and I went and grabbed a big old 1/8 inch filler rod. Same ER70S2. It's just a big one to fill in that gap I was showing you earlier. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish this weld up now. All right, so been working on cleaning up that weld, and I've got this fitting back in here nicely. And what I'm going to do next is go ahead and use a Sharpie to mark this profile like I did on the other side. It'll be time to trim this down and polish everything up, get it ready to weld in. Alright, I've got the piece all shaped up and cleaned up and the edges all grained, and fits in there pretty nicely. And now I'm just going to clean up all around where it welds in, get all this coating off, and go ahead and weld it in. Alright, got everything all cleaned up and polished up where the plate welds in. So I'll wipe it off one more time and go ahead and start tacking it in. Alright, so I've got the piece positioned with this piece of tape. I'm going to start back at this corner and just kind of go back and forth. Alright, let's go ahead and pull this piece of tape off now that it's tacked in place, and after that I'll add a few more tacks and start running some beads. Cool. Alright, I'm going to let that cool. Alright, start running a bead down here, letting it cool between halves just like the other side, and I'll kind of work my way around just like that other one. Alright, now we're inside the car on the driver's side. It's time to go ahead and weld the top of the plate up. Got a new piece of filler rod here. Alright, I just took that one bead at a time and was real careful with the amperage, and I was able to get a pretty decent weld there. There were some contaminants that started to bubble the weld, but it went pretty much as well as I think it could have. So it's all welded in now, looking good. Now it's time to move on to getting that #1 rear cross member in here. Cool. Alright, so now that we have the plates in place, it's time to go ahead and notch these inner frame rails for that #1 rear cross member. As I showed you earlier, I kind of have a mark on here, and what I did is I just took a file and held it vertically and just filed the edge of this tube and just kind of abraded the coating there so that I can know exactly what the vertical edge of this tube, where that is. And then I measured I measured from these on both sides, the transmission cross member mounts, just for symmetry. But I've lined up where I want the notch with that main hoop. You can kind of see right there through the hole. I'll look back on the driver's side. You can see, trying to line the camera up so I'm looking straight on at it, but you can see that main hoop right there and where this mark is, and that's gonna land the #1 bars that goes straight across the car, kind of right there. And so it'll be right at the edge of this weld. It'll line up with that main hoop, and I'll have some good room to weld that on back there, be able to get kind of into that cove. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pointed punch and kind of make a dimple right there. Start with a 1/8 inch pilot hole just to get through the metal, and then drill a 1/4 inch pilot hole all the way through, which matches the pilot bit on the hole saw arbor. And I'll use a 1 5/8 hole saw, which matches this tube. 2A can be 1.5 inch, but these are already 1 5/8, which I kind of prefer anyway. Kind of a lot of axial forces going through this, and a lot of stuff attaches to it. And the #1 bar is also 1 5/8, so that is the reason that the hole saw is going to be 1 5/8. So I'm gonna go through that process on both sides. I'm gonna start over here, just go left to right, and we'll check that out. And it'll be time to make up that #1 rear cross member and start fitting it up in the car. Yeah, that's right where I wanted it. The trick with this is I'm gonna try to keep this drill as level as possible. I think I also want to kind of move y'all over this way. Might be hard to see that, but I kind of need some working room here. All right, now I've got the 1/4 inch bit. It's going to be pretty imperative to keep this nice and level going across. I was thinking about maybe going through the back of the tube with that 1/8 inch bit, but it's flexible, and if it kind of found a path other than level, it might have kind of favored that and not drilled through straight. Let me get this brake line out of the way. So I'm just going to do that with a 1/4 inch bit, and hopefully be able to poke through nice and perpendicularly with the tube. Cool. Now keep it nice and level, go all the way through. All right, that looks pretty good. Clean that up a little bit. All right, I don't want to make a big old mess, but figure I ought to put a little grinding oil on the hole saw just so it doesn't totally get everything really hot and mess the hole saw blade up. I'm just gonna carefully ease this through and try to get a nice level notch. It does exactly what I need. All right, completed the notch. Go ahead and relax that. It's looking good. All right, here's a close-up look. Shoots right through to where we're trying to land that. Now, just need to set up and do the other side just the same. Cool. Go ahead and measure it out. That looks perfect. All right, we're through. A little connected on top still, but that's all right. But as you can see, that's all the way through. Cool. Points right where it needs to go. So what I need to do next is get these rear bar pieces out of the way. I actually have to cut them off of that. These are lower control arm torque box boxing plates, but gotta get them out of the way so I can actually position the #1 bar in the car, put it in. Even if I kind of pried these down, I still couldn't click it into something like that. So I gotta get these out of the way, and then I'll take the drum sander and clean this up on either side, make sure everything's dimensional and looking good, and we'll check it out at that point. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this tube as closely to this boxing plate as I can, and drop it out of the car. All right, got one out. Turn you around and we'll check out the other side. And it is liberated from the car. All right. Now we definitely have some space for a #1 rear cross member. So let's get ready to bend that up next. Then we can fit it into the car. Cool. All right, we're back over at my shop. It's time to make the new #1 rear cross member. It's actually got 5 bends in it. With this, I want to start in the middle. I'm going to bend the middle bend and then go out from there, just so that it's as symmetrical as possible. The beginning of the bend and the end of it are a little bit different kind of in form. So I just kind of like to go out from the center with stuff that's like this. I've got a piece of 1 5/8 chromoly here, 083, that I'm going to make it from. I'm going to cut a length off of that and then start bending it up. We'll take it over there and start putting it in the Chevelle. right, so there's one more process that I need to do to this #1 rear cross member bar, and that is to cut the ends basically to length and also to angle. So since the outside parts of these or of this bar go up at 8 degrees, I need to cut the end of the bar at an 8-degree angle compared to that length, so that it fits the vertical little pieces I just welded in the car that this is going to land on. So what I've done is I've laid out this 60-inch ruler, centering the 30-inch mark with the center line of the tube, and it's just nice to set it up like this. You can use a carpenter square and slide it along that straight edge and just kind of plot out all the points. You can verify measurements and whatever else at the same time, but I've marked it at the width. Went ahead and just measured the car one more time and got an exact width that turned out to be between those plates that I just welded in, and I plotted it out and actually marked them at that width and at the angle. So 8 degrees once again, and so what I've done is I have set the cold saw up at 8 degrees. Kind of see down there, kind of hard to see, but I just use marks like that as kind of a benchmark. I always use a protractor to verify the angle, the same one I use to measure the angles on that. So everything's set. I'm going to go ahead, clamp this in, cut it, clean the ends up, measure, verify it's right. It'll be time to go ahead and try it out in the car. All right, so what I'm currently doing is I'm setting this tube up in the cold saw to go ahead and cut this one end, and I've got this one marked on this side, but instead of turning the saw to the other 8 degrees, what I'm going to do, since I only have this side of the tube marked, is I'm going to go ahead, cut this side, and I'm going to measure that width that I need from this side over to the back side of the other side, make a new mark that'll correspond with the one I've already made, and that'll just double verify that it is also the right width as well as marked and oriented the right way in the saw. So I'm actually going to go ahead and put you on a time lapse, and I'll go through that process, and we'll check it out in the car after that. Another thing that I need to do is make sure this is nice and level in the saw. Just since I'm cutting this at an angle, I don't want it to be off angle and have this thing sweep forward or backwards. All right, so I've got the new #1 rear cross member bar mocked up in the car, and what I'm looking at right now is just kind of how it fits onto these 2A bars that I notched earlier. I've already marked them, as you can see, for where I need to kind of grind them down so that they match evenly. You can see there's a gap here and a smaller gap there. And then on this side, the outside's got a bigger gap than the inside. So I've got that marked. I'm gonna have to work on all this and then measure it and make sure everything's nice and even. But it's mocked up in there and looking pretty good. So kind of gives you an idea how that goes in. So I'm just going to work on, I'm going to take the die grinder with the drum sander and just kind of clean these up until everything's nice and straight and even, and we'll check it out after that. All right, cool. So I've been working on fitting that #1 bar up in the car. Got the ends all trimmed up, and here's how it looks. It's Pretty sweet, nice and centered. I have the drive shaft centerline string here, and looks good. You can see I got the notches nice and tight on where it welds to the frame. Go over the other side. Actually, they're not notches, it's a pretty much straight cut. I had to grind a little bit just to fit some of the features of how the frame's welded together, but also worked on cleaning up the notches on these inner frame rails a lot. I got them all nice and straight and even, and got everything fitting together well. But what I have to do also is I'm going to need to put a couple of uprights. SFI calls them number 18, and they're going to go between this number 1 bar and the number 15 bar. Here, I'll turn you around. So if you look up through there, you can see here, let me go to the other side. So the main hoop lands here, and it goes up, and there's a crossbar. It goes all the way across the main hoop there, and that's number 15. And I have to have these two number 18 uprights go between the number 1 and number 15. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to land those right where these 2A connect to the number 1. So it creates a nice strong node where all the bars come together, and it can shoot up to that number 15 and be nice and strong. So the problem with that is if I weld this number 1 in place, that number 15's welded in place, it's going to be really hard to jam that notched bar in. So what I'm going to do is weld this number 1 to the 2A on either side, but I'm going to leave it loose here. But I want to complete the weld up on top, because the number 15 or the number 18s will land right here. So under where this tape is, I want to weld that all the way, and again leave this loose so I can kind of pull this down out of the way. Still has a little wiggle, you can see, just because this bar isn't supported anywhere yet. It will be by this number 1, and I can jam those 18 uprights in and get all that cleaned up and ready to fit in, put those in, and then finish all the welding for the number 1. So what I need to work on next is I need to clean this up and clean these inner frame rails up, drill gas expansion holes on either landing spot on the frame here, as well as on the number 1 bar with a 2A land, and then just work on getting this tacked in and welded in. All right, so while the tube's still mocked up, before I pull it out to clean everything up, what I want to start with is I just want to take a Sharpie here, and I'm going to trace around where this bar sits, just so that I know where I need to drill a gas expansion hole, and kind of where I need to make sure the metal's really clean for welding this bar into place. And I'll go ahead and do that on both sides. And I'll also go ahead and mark the number 1 bar where the 2A meets it, just to do the same thing. I'm going to make sure it's nice and polished up, cleaned up well, and also go ahead and drill an expansion hole in the number 1 bar on either side as well. Now that I've got the bar out, you can see where I drew the circle where it lands on the frame rail here, and I'm just going to go ahead and drill a gas expansion hole, the 1/8 inch drill bit, right in the center on both sides. Now it's just time to make sure everything's nicely polished out where that number 1 bar is going to sit. All right, so now that I've got the frame all polished up and ready to go, I need to go ahead and grind the finish off of these inner frame rails here. I'm going to have to put the car down on the lift probably to get the tops really well, but I'm going to start on the bottom with this same sander and just work it as much as I can. We'll check that out. Alright, now we're inside the car. We're actually on the passenger side looking down. This is the main hoop. And I've got a 3-inch Scotch-Brite pad on the roll-out grinder. I'm going to use it to polish the top of this tube on either side. And then I'll go underneath and make sure I've got everything cleaned up. Alright, so I've got everything cleaned up, the number 1 bar and the 2A and the frame. Everything's ready to go. So now I'm going to go ahead and position this new number 1 rear cross member into place, tape it up in place, get it just right, and we'll start tacking it in after that. Alright, it's looking good. I'll give it a little bit of final measurement and adjustment, and we'll start making those tacks. Cool. Alright, so I've got the number 1 bar all positioned in the car, and again, I'm not going to be welding this yet. I'm just going to be tacking the 2A tubes on so that the whole thing can still move around a little bit to sneak those number 18 bars in. I'm going to start my tack here, then go to the other side, and then add a few more. What I've been doing is I've been measuring between this surface and this surface, and it's like 9 and 9/16 inches is where it was before. So I've just been setting it at that again. This one I actually had to clamp in a little bit. It was really close. And then this one's kind of held in place with this bar that's kind of jammed in there. So that's the number 9 seat bar. But looking good. Now it's just time to weld it. Cool. Alright, angle looks great. Go ahead and tack the other side and go on from there. Still looking good. Sweet. Awesome. Cool. So this is tacked in with 2 tacks on each side now. It's looking pretty good. You can see it still can move around a little, so I can sneak those number 18 bars in. Interesting though, I was noticing that it was really taking a lot of power, a lot of amperage, these welds, and then it occurred to me these are like 120 thousandths thick, these 2A, because they're mild steel. So that it's one of those things you can really tell when you step up to a thicker wall tubing. It'll take a little more power to liquefy that puddle. I started on 124 amps. I've got it up to 132. I might even crank it to 136 or so. But it seems to be working well. Tacked nicely. Got some good metal in there. So it's holding on now. Got the tape off. I'm going to wipe everything down to make sure it's clean. And add some more tacks. And then next we'll want to go on top and complete the welds across where those number 18 bars are going to sit down on there. So we'll check that out next. Alrighty, tacked in pretty well. Let's move on to the top. Cool. All right, cool. Got the Chevelle down on the lift, and you can see it's time to weld the tops of these things. All right, I got you in the back seat, kind of looking forward and down at the joint. I'll work my way across. What I'm wanting to do is I'm wanting to weld from the outside to the inside, because if I went the other way, the weld would get hotter and hotter towards the outside, and I think it would pull the end of that tube forward a little worse than it will welding this way. Hopefully it won't be too much at all, and it's kind of inconsequential, but I just want to try to keep that straight just so that it's not all warped up under there. But that's my reason for going this way, and then I'll just continue under the car from the inside back to the out to finish the weld. And I'll finish it once this is all welded and tacked on to the end on either side and everything else. All right, go ahead and let that cool down and set up on the other side. All right, we're on the driver's side, just gonna start doing the same thing. I actually welded this one a little further, but it was going nice and smooth, so I'll switch back, and we'll switch back one more time. It'll be time for the number 18s. Alright, looking good. Let it cool, and we'll start making those number 18 bars next, and we'll check that out. Alright, we're back over at my shop, and off camera I've gone ahead and cut a couple pieces of 1 5/8 083 chromoly, and these are going to be the number 18 bars going between the number 1 and number 15. Now all I need to do is just notch these and clean them up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make one and then kind of see how it fits, and I might take you over there with me to check that out, and then we'll finish up the other one and then work on cleaning it up, tack it in the car and all that. So let's check out the process. Alright, so I've got one of those tubes set up in the notcher. I'm going to go ahead and notch it, clean the end up, get it all kind of to spec, and then notch the other side parallel with it, because the number 1 and the number 15 bars are parallel. And then once I notch, I'll probably notch both bars like that because this needs to be straight. Then I'll set up to notch the where the 2A also kind of incorporates with those, and that's going to be at an angle and offset a little bit. So I'll do that, and then at that point that's probably when I'll take the first one and go try it on the car. And then after that I'll finish the second one and get them both in the car. I'll put you on the time lapse and we'll check that out. Alright, cool. So got one made up. Gonna go see how it fits. You can see kind of the extra notch there for that 2A bar. Hopefully that's got a good profile. Kind of rounded it off and deburred it and stuff. Always have to round this kind of notch for the welds between the two tubes that it's landing on. But let's go check it out in the car. Cool. All right, let's try to jam this thing in there. Gonna set it down on that and push it down. Actually, there we go. Oh yeah, sits in there pretty well. It's a little loose, but I think that needs to come up. So that's good. All right. Nice. Check, see if all those notches look right. It's looking pretty tight. So I think let's put the car up on the lift and see what it looks like from underneath. But from up here it's looking pretty good. Alright, got the Chevelle up. Let's check this thing out. So it's looking pretty good. The one tight spot I am seeing is actually kind of what I was talking about before. You can see that little point hits that weld there. You can see kind of a gap over there. A little bit of a gap over the 2A bar here. And this side's looking pretty good. So I'm just gonna kind of work on that stuff a little more, but it's looking like it fits well. This bar looks like it's a little, like it could go up just a little bit, and actually kind of pushed it up just a second ago and it kind of clamped that pretty tight actually. So I think it's going to work out pretty well, and so I'll just clean that up a little bit. And then I actually, before I put the car up, I did kind of check it on this side, and it's looking pretty good on that side too. That one's going to need a little bit more trimming just because this fits a little differently on this side, but it's, you know, just about the same exact thing. So that's cool. Gonna do all that, then we'll check it out after that. All right, we're back over here at my shop. I'm gonna work on doing just that little bit of cleanup on this bar, and then go ahead and make that extra notch on the other one, and then we'll try them out in the car. Let's check it out. Alright, back under the car, and I'm going to go ahead and stick these in place and we'll see how they fit. Alright, well, they're looking pretty good. That one's pretty much the same, the driver's side. I just clearanced it a little more for that weld. This side I'm going to need to work on just a little bit. I need to give a little more clearance for the 2A bar, but I'm going to take it back to my shop, grind it down a bit, then we'll check out how it fits after all that. Alright, let's check out those number 18 bars from up top here. They look really nice. Fit in pretty good and tight, and they're gonna do the job. So all that's left to do with those is to polish everything out, drill gas expansion holes, and start welding. So we'll check that out next. Here's just a look at how everything fits up. Alright, and before I go ahead and pull these out, what I want to go ahead and do is I'm going to take a Sharpie and just kind of mark around where they land on the number 15 bar. Keep that kind of in place there. And what that'll do is just, again, let me know where I need to polish and where I need to drill the gas expansion hole. And this is all already polished down here, and I also will know right where to drill the hole down there. It'll just be right on top of the tube, lined up with this intersection point between the two tubes. So do that on both sides, polish them up, stick them back in here, and we'll check them out when it's time to weld them. Cool, got them in, looking good. All right, cool. So as you just saw, we got both number 18 uprights in, and I've just kind of been working on measuring between the main hoop and those bars and just making sure they're in nice, straight, and level, and also lined up with the 2A inner frame rails here. They all look good. So I think what I'm going to do is actually lift the car up on the lift, and I'm going to jack up on the number 1 cross member and go ahead and tack it in place. And what that'll do is it'll push up against these bars and kind of hold them in place, so that I can tack those without them being able to move around or anything. Right now, you know, as I stated earlier, this bar is kind of loose and it can wiggle, so I think by securing that it'll just make it a lot easier to hold these in place, tack everything in, and also keep from having any kind of gap between, you know, the 18 bars and the 15 or number 1. So we'll put the car up and check that out next. Got the car up in the air, and here's the look at the number 1 bar here. So you can see I've got it jacked up by this transmission jack, and it's just kind of pushing it, not too hard. I don't want to bend it, but I've got the number 18 uprights nice and tight, and just kind of working on measuring everything out, making sure everything's right. This side looks good. This side, it looks all right, but I think this is just a little low. So I'm just going to make sure I kind of pick that up a little when I tack it. And once everything's all welded in, it should tie in nicely and be nice and even as long as I tack it just right. So that's what we'll check out next. All right, so I actually used the old number 1 bar on the floor jack there to lift this up just that tiny little bit to get it in place. And so now I'm going to go ahead and tack it in. and then move on over to the other side. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and get a second tack just to make sure this thing stays in place. Alright, let's weld up the other side, give it a couple tacks. Alright, cool. So I've been working on getting these bars just lined up how I want them, nice and vertical and evenly spaced and everything, just kind of fine-tuning the little wiggle room that I have with them. And actually have them taped as well as, you know, just positioned in, just to make sure they're in the place I need them. And I'm going to go ahead and tack them in next. So we'll check that out. I'm going to start on the driver's side, go to the passenger side, and I'm going to put one tack on the bottom and one on the top, and with that I'll be able to heat it up and adjust the bar a little bit if I need to, if I just need to do a little fine tuning. So I'm going to go ahead, tack it, and we'll check it out now. Alright, let's check out the other side. Alright, it's in. I'm going to measure both of them up, make sure they're just right, and then work on welding them in a little bit. Cool. Alright, everything's measuring out great. Kind of moved it over, moved both bars over just a tiny little bit, but barely at all, just kind of measuring the angle. But peeling the tape off, I'm going to add some more tacks in just a second, just to make sure they don't go anywhere as I start to weld them. Alright, tacked in there nice and strong, so let's check out some welding next. pretty good. All right, so I've put the car up on the lift and moved to underneath, and now I'm going to start welding kind of under here. I'm going to weld the number 1 bar to the frame a bit, as much as I can, taking heats. You know, I don't want to weld it all at once. I want to give it some time to cool at a certain point when it gets hot, but I'm going to work on that. I'm going to work on welding the 2A to the number 1 as well as those number 18 bars in. So we'll check that out next. Let that cool and move around a little bit too. Awesome. All right, I'm going to work on where the 2A attaches to the number 1 a little bit, kind of while the outside's cool. And also it's just good to bounce around so you don't concentrate too much stress in one place. So check these out. I'll take them probably to the bottom or so on both sides, and then let it cool, and then probably get back on the outsides, and then gotta tie the 18s in as well. So we'll check that out next. All right, well, I welded this thing up pretty much as I can without lifting the body up off the frame, which I will be doing a little bit later. But everything looks pretty good, and it's all tied in now. And next it's just going to be time to kind of connect the lower control arm mounts up to this, and the owner wants me to add some diagonal stuff and even a center X, but we'll have to check that out next time. I think this is a good spot to go ahead and cut this video off, so we'll check that out then. But right now this thing's looking pretty sweet. Well, hope you guys enjoyed this section of the build, and obviously got a lot more to do kind of in the floor area and all around in this Chevelle, and we'll be checking that out. But I'm going to cut this episode off right here. Figure it's a pretty good point. Kind of went over the main structure of the floor and the #1 bar and 18s and all that stuff. That's kind of the main structure. I'm going to continue next time with some more reinforcements in the floor area. Going to do some diagonals and a center floor X. Also need to tie in those rear lower control arm mounts into the tubular part of the chassis. So hope you guys tune in to check that out. Until then, thanks for watching, liking, and subscribing. I really appreciate it. Also, I love to hear from you guys in the comments, so feel free to leave one, and we'll see you next time. Until then, take care, and thanks again for watching.